The morning fog hung low over Arlington National Cemetery as Sarah Mitchell stood at the iron gates, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. She wore her dress uniform, the one she had pressed carefully the night before, making sure every crease was perfect. The medals on her chest caught the early light, but her eyes were fixed on the gathering crowd in the distance. General Robert Hayes was being laid to rest today, the man who had changed her life, the man who had believed in her when no one else would, and she had come 2,000 miles to say goodbye. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back." The voice was sharp, official. A young military police officer stood before her, his hand raised like a stop sign. Sarah blinked. "I'm here for the funeral, General Hayes." "The funeral is private, ma'am. Family and invited guests only." His eyes swept over her uniform, lingering on her face with barely concealed doubt. "I served under General Hayes," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady. "I have every right to be here." The second guard, older and thicker around the middle, stepped forward. "Look, lady, we don't know who you are. We have our orders. No one gets through without being on the list." Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out her military ID. "Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell. I served with the general in Afghanistan. Check your list again." The younger guard took her ID but barely glanced at it. "There's no Sarah Mitchell on here. Now, if you don't leave voluntarily, we'll have to escort you out." "There has to be a mistake." Sarah's voice cracked slightly, and she hated herself for it. She had faced enemy fire without flinching. She had carried wounded soldiers through gunfire. But standing here, being turned away from honoring the man who meant everything to her, felt like being shot all over again. "No mistake," the older guard said. His tone had shifted from official to something uglier. "We get people like you all the time, trying to crash funerals, get attention. Some people will do anything for their 15 minutes. The words hit Sarah like a slap. "People like me. Crazy fans, hero chasers," he shrugged. "The general was famous, important. You wouldn't be the first person to show up pretending to be something you're not." Sarah felt heat rise in her chest. Through the gates, she could see the funeral procession forming. Officers in their finest uniforms, dignitaries, the flag-draped coffin. She had flown through the night to be here, maxed out her credit card for the last-minute plane ticket because the general's daughter had called her personally, had told her that her father would have wanted her there. "Call the family," Sarah said quietly. "Call Jennifer Hayes. She'll confirm I'm supposed to be here." The younger guard laughed. "Right, we're going to bother the general's daughter on the day of her father's funeral because some woman showed up at the gate. That's not happening." "Please," Sarah hated the pleading in her voice, but she was desperate. The service would start in 15 minutes. Just make one phone call. "Ma'am, final warning. Leave now or we'll arrest you for trespassing." Sarah stood frozen. Around her, other attendees were being waved through the gates. Men in uniform, women in black dresses, politicians she recognized from television, but not her, never her. She had spent her whole career being underestimated, being told she didn't belong. First by the recruiters who tried to steer her toward administrative work. Then by the drill sergeants who pushed her twice as hard as the men. By the commanding officers who questioned every decision she made. She had proved them all wrong, every single one of them except General Hayes. He had never doubted her for a second. And now she couldn't even attend his funeral. "What's the problem here?" A new voice cut through the tension. Deep, authoritative, edged with a southern accent. Sarah turned to see an older man approaching. He had to be in his 70s, with white hair and a weathered face mapped with wrinkles. But he walked with the straight-backed posture of a career military man. His uniform was immaculate, and on his chest, among the rows of ribbons and medals, hung the light blue ribbon with white stars. "The Medal of Honor." Both guards immediately straightened. "Colonel Davis, sir. No problem, just dealing with someone who's not on the guest list." Colonel Davis looked at Sarah, really looked at her. His eyes moved from her face to her uniform, to the purple heart and bronze star on her chest, then back to her face. "What's your name, soldier?" he asked. "Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, sir." Her voice was steady now. Something flickered in the colonel's eyes. Recognition, maybe, or just curiosity. "Mitchell, you serve under Bob Hayes." "Yes, sir, Afghanistan, second tour." "She's not on the list, sir," the older guard interjected. "We have our orders." Colonel Davis held up one hand, silencing him. He was still studying Sarah's face. Afghanistan, second tour. You wouldn't be the Sarah Mitchell from Kandahar, would you? Operation Iron Eagle. Sarah's breath caught. Yes, sir. The colonel's expression changed completely. The hard lines of his face softened and something like wonder crossed his features. Bob Hayes talked about you a lot, in fact. He turned to the guards and his voice went cold as steel. Let her through. Sir, we have orders. And I'm giving you a new order. This woman is not just welcome at this funeral. She's one of the guests of honor. Now open the damn gate. The guards looked at each other, confused and uncertain. That's an order, soldiers, Colonel Davis said quietly, but there was iron underneath the quiet. The gate swung open. Sarah walked through the cemetery beside Colonel Davis, her legs unsteady. Around them, other mourners were making their way toward the grave site, following the path between rows of white headstones that stretched as far as the eye could see. Thank you, sir, Sarah said quietly. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. Don't thank me yet. The colonel's voice was gruff but not unkind. I need to know something first. Are you really her, the Sarah Mitchell who pulled Bob Hayes out of that ambush? Sarah's jaw tightened. Sir, with respect, it wasn't like that. The general saved us, all of us. That's not how Bob told it. Colonel Davis slowed his pace, letting the other mourners move ahead. They were alone now among the graves. He came to visit me 6 months ago, told me a story about the bravest soldier he'd ever served with, a lieutenant who refused to leave anyone behind. Sarah looked away, fixing her eyes on a distant oak tree. The memories were always close to the surface, but she had learned to keep them locked away. Today they pressed against her mind like water against a dam. What happened over there? The colonel asked gently. Sarah took a deep breath. The air smelled like cut grass and earth. We were supposed to be on a simple patrol. Hearts and Minds mission, the general called it. Visit the village elders, distribute supplies, build trust. 10 of us, including General Hayes. He insisted on going personally. Said the villagers deserved respect, not just another junior officer. Sounds like Bob. We were leaving the village when the first RPG hit our lead vehicle. Sarah's voice was flat now, emotionless. It was the only way she could tell it. They had the road blocked ahead and behind, flanked us from both sides. We were trapped. She could see it all again. The dust and smoke, the screaming. Private Johnson, 19 years old, lying in the road with blood pooling beneath him. Sergeant Garcia returning fire while dragging 2 wounded soldiers toward cover. And General Hayes, always calm, always clear, directing their defense like a chess master. General Hayes took command of the situation immediately, Sarah continued. Got us organized, kept us from panicking, but we were pinned down. The vehicles were destroyed. 4 wounded, including the general himself. He took shrapnel to the leg in the first minutes. He never told me he was wounded. He wouldn't let anyone treat him until everyone else was taken care of. Sarah smiled despite herself, remembering the general's stubborn refusal, the way he'd barked orders even as blood soaked through his pant leg. I was the communications officer. I called for air support, evacuation, anything. But there was a sandstorm coming in. Nothing could fly. We were on our own. They had reached the grave site now, but hung back from the crowd. Sarah could see the coffin on its stand, the honor guard standing at attention. General Hayes's daughter, Jennifer, sat in the front row, her face hidden behind a black veil. The general made a decision, Sarah said. He ordered Sergeant Garcia to take the wounded and retreat to a defensive position in the village. The rest of us would hold the line, keep the enemy occupied until help arrived. But you didn't follow orders. No, sir, I didn't. Sarah's hands clenched at her sides. Because I realized something the general hadn't. The village had been evacuated. Every civilian was gone. It was a setup from the beginning. If we retreated there, we'd be surrounded with no cover and no civilians to limit their fire. It would be a killing box. Colonel Davis nodded slowly. What did you do? I convinced the general he was wrong. The words came out harder than she intended. I'd never contradicted him before, never questioned his orders, but I showed him the pattern, the empty windows in the village, the footprints in the dust, all leading away. He listened. He actually listened to a lieutenant who'd been in country 6 months telling him he was wrong. And he changed the plan. We found a dried riverbed rocky outcropping, moved the wounded there. Better sight lines, better cover. We held that position for 6 hours. Sarah's voice dropped to almost a whisper. The general was losing blood the whole time, getting weaker, but he never stopped leading, never stopped keeping us together. She remembered his face, pale under the desert sun, the way his hands shook when he thought no one was looking, but his voice had never wavered. When the sandstorm hit, we couldn't see 3 feet in front of us, Sarah continued. The enemy used it as cover to advance. They were close enough to throw grenades. That's when the general tried to make his last stand, told us to fall back, save ourselves. He was going to stay behind and give us time. But you didn't let him. No, sir, Sarah met the colonel's eyes. I knocked him down and dragged him. He was a big man and I'm not. I'm not large, but fear and adrenaline are powerful things. Sergeant Garcia and I got him back to the outcropping. Then I took his rifle and went back. Alone. Someone had to hold them off while we waited for extraction. The storm was clearing. I knew helicopters would come as soon as they could fly. I just had to buy us time. Sarah didn't tell him about the fear, about how her hands had shaken so badly she could barely hold the rifle, about how she'd whispered every prayer she'd ever learned and some she made up on the spot. I found a position between the enemy and my unit, high ground on a pile of rocks. I could see them coming through the last of the storm. I fired until my rifle jammed. Then I used my sidearm. Then I threw rocks. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. Actual rocks like a child, but it worked. It kept them cautious, kept them slow. Bob said you killed or wounded 11 enemy combatants yourself. I don't know the number, sir. I just know I didn't stop until I heard the helicopters. The memory of that sound still made her chest tight, the thump of rotors cutting through the dying wind, the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. The extraction team found me unconscious, Sarah said. I'd been shot twice, once in the shoulder, once in the side. I don't remember being hit, don't remember falling. I just remember the helicopters and then waking up in a hospital in Germany 3 days later. Colonel Davis was quiet for a long moment. Around them, people were taking their seats. The funeral was about to begin. The general recommended you for the Medal of Honor, he said finally. Sarah nodded. It was downgraded to the Bronze Star. They said I was just doing my job, that the circumstances didn't warrant the higher honor. And what do you think? I think the general was the hero that day, sir. He kept us alive with his leadership. I just made sure he survived to tell the story. The funeral service was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Sarah sat in the back row, Colonel Davis beside her, watching as speaker after speaker rose to praise General Hayes. They talked about his distinguished career, his tactical brilliance, his devotion to his soldiers. They mentioned his Silver Star, his Purple Heart, his 30 years of service. But no one mentioned Afghanistan. No one mentioned Kandahar. No one mentioned the day he almost died. Sarah felt the absence of that story like a missing tooth. It was the thing that defined her relationship with the general, the moment that had changed both of their lives. But here, in front of all these important people, it was invisible. Jennifer Hayes spoke last. She was in her mid-40s, with her father's strong jaw and steady eyes. Her voice broke several times as she talked about growing up as a military daughter, about the sacrifices her father had made, about how he'd always put his duty first. My father believed in honor, Jennifer said, tears streaming down her face. He believed in doing what was right even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. He believed in people. He saw potential where others saw obstacles. He gave chances when others gave up. Her eyes swept the crowd, and for just a moment they locked with Sarah's. Recognition flickered across Jennifer's face, followed immediately by confusion and then distress. The service ended with a 21-gun salute that made Sarah flinch despite herself. She still heard gunfire in her sleep sometimes, still woke up reaching for weapons that weren't there. As the crowd began to disperse, Jennifer Hayes made her way through the mourners. She was heading straight for Sarah, her face a mixture of emotions. Lieutenant Mitchell, Jennifer said, reaching out to take Sarah's hands. You came, thank God you came. Ma'am, I tried, Sarah began. I know, I just found out the guards turned you away. Jennifer's face flushed with anger. This is my fault, all of it. Ma'am. Jennifer glanced around at the dispersing crowd, then lowered her voice. Can we talk, privately? There's something you need to know. They walked to a quiet corner of the cemetery, away from the grave site. Colonel Davis excused himself tactfully, but Sarah saw him watching from a distance. My stepmother did this, Jennifer said without preamble. Claire, my father's second wife. Sarah had never met the woman. General Hayes had remarried 5 years ago, long after Sarah had rotated home from Afghanistan. She knew the general had a new wife, but they'd never discussed her in their occasional phone calls. "She's the one who organized the funeral," Jennifer continued. "She insisted on controlling the guest list, the service, everything. She said she was honoring my father's memory, but—" Jennifer's voice hardened. "She was erasing parts of it." "I don't understand." "My father kept journals. Did you know that? Detailed accounts of his entire career. After he died, I read them all, every single one." Jennifer pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse. "This is from the Afghanistan entries. He wrote this the day after you were discharged from the hospital in Germany." Sarah took the paper with shaking hands. The general's handwriting was strong and clear, even in photocopy. "Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell saved my life today, not figuratively, literally. She pulled me out of the fire when I was ready to die, then went back and held off an entire enemy force alone. They want to give her a Bronze Star, for the kind of courage that deserves the highest honor our nation can bestow. But she's young, she's junior, and God help us, she's a woman, so they'll give her a lesser medal and pat themselves on the back for recognizing her at all. I'm putting her in for the Medal of Honor anyway. I don't care if they downgrade it. I don't care if they file it away and forget it. The record will show the truth. Sarah Mitchell is the bravest soldier I've ever served with. Man or woman, she's the standard by which I'll measure courage for the rest of my life. I owe her everything, and I'll spend the rest of my career making sure people like her get the recognition they deserve." Sarah's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to cry. "There's more," Jennifer said quietly. "Pages and pages about you, about how you challenged him, how you made him reconsider his assumptions about women in combat, about young officers, about what leadership really means. You changed his thinking, Lieutenant. You made him a better general." "He never told me any of this." "He was planning to. He called me 3 weeks before he died and said he was writing a book, a memoir. He wanted to dedicate an entire chapter to you, to that day in Afghanistan. He wanted people to know the truth." Jennifer's voice broke. "But then he had the heart attack and there was no warning and he was just gone." "The guest list," Sarah said slowly, understanding dawning. "Your stepmother found the journals, read them, and decided they made my father look weak." Jennifer's hands clenched into fists. "She said a story about being saved by a junior female officer would tarnish his legacy, that it made him look incompetent. She wanted him remembered as the perfect hero, not as a real man who needed help. So she kept me off the list. She removed every name associated with Afghanistan, every soldier who served under him there, even Sergeant Garcia." Jennifer looked toward the grave site. "She wanted a funeral full of generals and politicians and medals, not the real people who knew him, who served with him, who loved him." Sarah followed her gaze and saw a woman standing alone by the coffin. She was in her 50s, blonde, wearing an expensive black dress and dark sunglasses. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the rigid set of her shoulders, the proprietary way she stood beside the casket. "That's Claire," Jennifer confirmed, "and she's about to find out she doesn't control this story anymore." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted near the grave site. Voices were raised in argument. Sarah saw the 2 guards from the gate, gesturing animatedly. With them was a tall man in a business suit, cemetery administration, probably, and several other officials. Colonel Davis was there too, his voice carrying across the cemetery. "I don't care what the family requested. This is a national cemetery, and that woman is a decorated combat veteran who served under General Hayes." Claire Hayes turned, and even behind her sunglasses, Sarah could feel the woman's cold stare. "Jennifer," Sarah said quietly, "I don't want to cause trouble. Not today. I can leave." "Absolutely not." Jennifer's voice was steel. "My father would want you here, and more than that, he'd want the truth told." She started walking toward the grave site. "Come on." They crossed the cemetery together, Sarah's heart pounding. People were staring now. The argument had drawn attention. As they approached, Claire Hayes removed her sunglasses, revealing sharp blue eyes and a face tight with anger. "Jennifer, what is this?" Claire demanded. "Who is this person?" "This is Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell," Jennifer said clearly. "The woman who saved Dad's life in Afghanistan." Part 4. Silence fell over the grave site like a blanket. The dozen or so remaining mourners stopped their conversations and turned to stare. Sarah felt their eyes on her, judging, measuring. She stood straighter, keeping her expression neutral. Claire Hayes's lips pressed into a thin line. Jennifer, this is neither the time nor the place for. For what? The truth. Jennifer's voice rang out across the cemetery. You removed her from the guest list, Claire. You removed all of Dad's Afghanistan veterans. You tried to erase an entire piece of his life. I did no such thing. I simply curated the attendees to reflect your father's distinguished career at the highest levels. You mean you invited the people who made you feel important? Jennifer took a step forward. My father kept journals, Claire, detailed journals. I have them all now. Claire's face went pale. Those journals are private family documents. And I'm family, you're not really. The words were harsh, but Jennifer's voice was calm. You were married to him for 5 years, I'm his daughter, and I know what he would have wanted. One of the remaining mourners, a general with 4 stars on his shoulders, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss this in private. No, the word came from Colonel Davis. He stepped forward, positioning himself beside Sarah. This woman was turned away from this funeral by guards following Mrs. Hayes's orders. She was insulted, demeaned, and treated like a criminal. If we take this private now, that wrong doesn't get righted. And who are you to make that decision? Claire demanded. The colonel smiled, but it wasn't friendly. Colonel James Davis, retired. I served with Bob Hayes for 20 years, and I'm a Medal of Honor recipient, which means I have certain privileges at military funerals, including the right to challenge guest list decisions. Sarah hadn't known that, wasn't even sure if it was entirely true, but the colonel said it with such authority that no one questioned him. The 4-star general studied Sarah with new interest. Lieutenant Mitchell, I'd like to hear your account of what happened at the gate. Sarah swallowed hard. Public speaking had never been her strength. She was a soldier, not a politician. But she'd faced enemy fire. She could face this. Sir, I arrived at the gate at 0800 hours. I presented my military ID and explained I'd served under General Hayes. The guards informed me I wasn't on the guest list and refused entry. They suggested I was a fan trying to crash the funeral. When I requested they contact the family, they threatened to arrest me for trespassing. Several people in the crowd muttered. The 4-star general's expression darkened. And if Colonel Davis hadn't intervened, he asked. I would have watched the funeral from outside the gate, sir, or left entirely. Claire made a dismissive gesture. This is absurd. I don't know this woman. She could be anyone. She's the woman Dad wanted to give the Medal of Honor, Jennifer said flatly. She pulled out another paper, this one official-looking. This is his recommendation, filed with the Department of Defense in 2014. Detailed account of her actions during Operation Iron Eagle, personally written and signed by Major General Robert Hayes. Jennifer began to read, her voice carrying across the cemetery. On November 12, 2014, during combat operations near Kandahar, Afghanistan, First Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell displayed conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty. The words washed over Sarah like water. She'd never heard the full recommendation, never knew the details of what the general had written. As Jennifer read, the story emerged, not the simple version Sarah had told, but the full truth. Every decision she'd made, every risk she'd taken, the general had documented it all. Lieutenant Mitchell's actions directly resulted in the survival of all 10 members of our patrol, including this officer, Jennifer read. Her tactical judgment, courage under fire, and refusal to abandon her fellow soldiers exemplify the highest traditions of military service. She is eminently deserving of the Medal of Honor. Jennifer lowered the paper. It was downgraded to a bronze star. Dad fought the decision for months, but he was overruled. He never forgave them for it, and he never stopped talking about Lieutenant Mitchell's bravery. The 4-star general stepped forward. Lieutenant, is this account accurate? Sir, the general was the real hero that day, his leadership. I asked if the account was accurate. Sarah met his eyes. Yes, sir, essentially. There's no essentially in a Medal of Honor recommendation, Lieutenant. Either you did these things or you didn't. Yes, sir, I did. The general turned to Claire Hayes. Ma'am, I don't know what your relationship with Bob Hayes was like, but I knew him for 30 years, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that he would be ashamed of what happened here today. Claire's face flushed red. How dare you? I dare because I'm not afraid of you, the general said simply. You're a civilian widow with no military standing. You organized this funeral, but this is a military cemetery, and these are military honors. Lieutenant Mitchell has every right to be here, more right than most. He turned to Sarah and, to her shock, saluted. I owe you an apology, Lieutenant, on behalf of the United States Army. You should have been seated in the front row today. You should have been honored as the hero you are. Sarah returned the salute, her throat tight. Around her, other officers were saluting too. Even the two guards from the gate, who had followed the commotion, stood at attention with their hands raised. Colonel Davis stepped forward. Bob told me something when he visited 6 months ago. He said he was tired of watching brave soldiers get overlooked because they didn't fit someone's idea of what a hero should look like. He said it was time the Army did better. The colonel's voice grew stronger. Bob Hayes was my friend, one of the best men I ever knew, and he would want Lieutenant Mitchell here. He would want her story told. He would want her honored. Jennifer moved to stand beside Sarah, taking her hand. Dad talked about you all the time. He was so proud of you. He followed your career, did you know that? He called your commanding officers to check on you. Wrote letters of recommendation for your promotions. He considered you one of his greatest successes, not because he trained you, but because you had the courage to challenge him when he was wrong. Sarah's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I just wanted to say goodbye to him, she whispered. Then say goodbye, Jennifer squeezed her hand, the way he deserves. They walked together to the coffin. Sarah placed her hand on the smooth wood, feeling the grain beneath her fingers. The flag draped over it was perfectly crisp, the stars and stripes vivid against the dark casket. Thank you, sir, Sarah said softly, for believing in me, for teaching me, for being the kind of leader I want to be. She swallowed hard. I promise I'll keep making you proud. Behind her, she heard Claire Hayes begin to protest again, but Jennifer cut her off sharply. There were footsteps, a car door slamming. When Sarah finally turned around, Claire was gone, being escorted away by the cemetery officials. The four-star general approached. Lieutenant Mitchell, I'd like to speak with you when you're ready. There's been an injustice here that goes beyond today's insult. Your Medal of Honor recommendation should never have been downgraded. Sarah blinked. Sir, that was almost 10 years ago. There's no statute of limitations on doing the right thing. He handed her a card. Call my office. We're going to review your case. After he left, Colonel Davis smiled at her. Bob would have loved this. He was always fighting the bureaucracy. Looks like he's still winning battles from beyond the grave. Jennifer laughed through her tears. That sounds exactly like Dad. The cemetery was nearly empty now. Just Sarah, Jennifer, Colonel Davis, and the honor guard who would maintain vigil until the burial was complete. The fog had burned off, and the sun shone warm on the white headstones. Will you tell me about him? Jennifer asked. Not the general, my dad. What was he like over there? Sarah smiled. He sang off-key, did you know that? Country songs mostly, drove everyone crazy during long patrols. Oh God, yes, he did that my entire childhood. They sat together on a bench overlooking the grave, and Sarah talked. She told Jennifer about the general's terrible jokes, his insistence on learning everyone's hometown, the way he always carried extra candy to give to village children. She told her about his patience, his wisdom, his ability to stay calm when everything was falling apart. She told her about the day he saved them all, not with guns or tactics, but by listening to a junior lieutenant who told him he was wrong. He gave me more than my life that day, Sarah said. He gave me confidence. He showed me that being right mattered more than being senior. That good leaders listen. That courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified. He wrote that you changed him too, Jennifer said. That you reminded him why he joined the army in the first place, to serve with people braver than himself. The sun was high overhead when they finally stood to leave. Sarah took one last look at the general's coffin, gleaming in the light. Goodbye, sir, she whispered. Colonel Davis walked her to the gate, the same gate where she'd been turned away hours earlier. The guards who had blocked her path stood at attention now, their faces carefully neutral. Lieutenant Mitchell, the younger guard said. Ma'am, I owe you an apology. I was wrong. I should have listened. I should have checked more carefully. I'm sorry. Sarah studied him. He was young, probably on his first assignment, probably terrified of making mistakes. She remembered being that young, that uncertain. You were following orders, she said. That's what soldiers do, but remember this, sometimes the right thing and the ordered thing aren't the same. That's when your real character shows. Yes, ma'am. She offered her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, he shook it. Outside the cemetery, Colonel Davis turned to her. What will you do now? Sarah thought about the four-star general's card in her pocket, about the possibility of the Medal of Honor recommendation being reviewed, about all the years she'd spent trying to prove herself over and over to people who would never be satisfied. I'm going to keep serving, she said. Keep being the kind of soldier the general believed I could be. That's the best way to honor him. He'd like that. Colonel Davis saluted her one more time. It was an honor to meet you, Lieutenant. Bob was right about you. You are something special. Sarah returned the salute, then watched him walk away. She stood alone outside the cemetery gates, the same spot where she'd been turned away that morning. Everything had changed. Nothing had changed. She was still the woman who had to fight twice as hard for half the recognition. Still the soldier who got underestimated and overlooked. Still the lieutenant who didn't fit someone's idea of what a hero should look like. But she was also the woman who had saved General Robert Hayes, the soldier who had held off an enemy force alone, the officer whose courage had earned a Medal of Honor recommendation, even if it had been downgraded. And now, finally, people were starting to know her story. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. Thank you for coming. Thank you for saving him. Thank you for being you. Dad would be so happy you were here. Call me anytime. Your family now. Sarah smiled, wiped her eyes one last time, and headed for her rental car. She had a plane to catch, a base to get back to, a career to continue. But first, she had one more thing to do. She drove to a quiet coffee shop and pulled out her laptop. For years, people had asked her to tell her story, to write about her experiences. She'd always refused, feeling like it would be bragging, or worse, that no one would believe her. But General Hayes had believed her, had documented the truth, had fought to make sure her courage was recognized. Now it was her turn to tell the story. Not for glory, not for recognition, but so that the next young female soldier, the next underestimated lieutenant, the next person who didn't fit the mold, would know they weren't alone. Sarah opened a new document and began to type. On November 12, 2014, Major General Robert Hayes saved my life. Not because he pulled me out of danger, but because he taught me that my voice mattered. She wrote through the afternoon and into the evening. She wrote about fear and courage, about being doubted and proving herself, about the cost of service and the meaning of honor. Most of all, she wrote about a general who had believed in her when no one else would. And as the sun set over the Virginia horizon, Sarah Mitchell, Bronze Star recipient, Purple Heart holder, and the woman who had been blocked from a funeral until a Medal of Honor holder intervened, finally told her truth. It was a story worth telling. The general had always said so. Now the whole world would know it too.